So right now I'd love to welcome our panelists. So we're going to be doing a Q&A panel on contract and freelance work. If you have any questions during this time, there should be a little Q&A box in Zoom. So just make sure to add your questions into there. So I'd like to introduce to you Neha, Alexi, and Kitty. So if you all could turn your cameras on. Neha is a video game composer and sound designer and classical pianist, currently working on Spleen with Pamplemousse Games and Mini Maker Good Enough with Casa Rara Studio. She's a self-proclaimed Crash Team Racing child prodigy and pun enthusiast. Welcome, Neha. And so next up, we've got Alexi, who has contracted with Zemery Software and Sunday Month. He focuses on games, but has flexed to industries like toys, rendering, and education. And currently he's working at Weathered Sweater as a contract lead environment artist. And our third panelist today is Kitty, who is an indie producer with 6 years of freelance experience, including concept development, QA, scheduling, creating design docs. Kitty has done it all, often working with multiple teams at once. Her titles include Game of Thrones, Tale of Crows, and Dog Biscuit, a drawing book. So welcome, everybody. So nice to see y'all. I'm actually really excited that we have a lot of people, it's like a diverse range of disciplines. So I'm really excited to see where there are similarities within the types of work that you've done and also any differences that we find. And I'd love to start with the question of, and this could be for anybody or all of you, what are some challenges of contract or freelance work for you?
Does anyone want to dive in?
I think I've got a pretty good answer that will definitely overlap with no matter what discipline you are doing with contract work. I think the biggest challenge is always going to be clients, because that's like the biggest difference between contract work and being employed is that you have to kind of appease the client and they don't usually have a concrete vision of what they want. They just kind of have a general idea, and that's kind of like your biggest responsibility as the contractor and why you're being brought in as a contractor is that you are going to kind of fulfill their vision and make it concrete. That's always the biggest challenge for me, at least.
Sorry?
Oh, sorry. I just thought that was interesting because for me, it's a bit the opposite, where my clients have always known exactly what they wanted and they were quite precise. The challenge in my plan, in my section, would be more, when is work coming? I don't know. It could happen that everything just stumbles on the same week, or it could be like 2 months of nothing. So planning ahead and planning expenses, your income, and just knowing what's ahead is a bit scarier.
I think so. I'm a producer, but I'm also secretly a web developer as well. So I freelance for both of those things, and I find that the problems that I have on each of those areas are very, very different. One thing I do think is that my producer job is easier because I think as a freelancer, you also have to be part producer because you have to manage up and you have to manage your clients. So freelancing as a producer is easy because I'm being paid to already do that, versus when I'm a web developer, I'm having to produce on top of doing my web developer stuff. And the problems are different. I think the main problem for me is trying to schedule it. As a producer, it's trying to schedule people in a reasonable way because people want you to be there every day, even if you're only working with them 1 day a week. They want to see you every day, so it's 1 day a week across 5 days, which can start to become a lot very quickly, and why I've learned that my volume is like no more than 3 clients, even if it is only 1 day a week for them. With web design, or web development, it's generally working, as Alexis said, it's working with people that A, don't know what they want, and B, don't understand the technology enough to be able to accurately ask for what they want or understand what they're asking at times. So sometimes they'll be like, can you just do this small thing? And I'm like, that's going to take me 3 days.
It's never a small thing.
Yeah.
Never a small thing. So yeah, the issues and with web development, I can just do it all in one chunk versus producing, which has to be spread out. So the challenges are different.
I want to go back to something that you said, Neha, about not knowing when like you'll get work, or maybe it all falls in one time, or maybe it comes in different time periods. One question I had, and also a question from the audience, is like, what is your process to find work? And also, do you have any tips for getting your first freelance games gig? So two similar questions.
So the question is a bit in two parts. So in the before times, before a global pandemic, I would say that physical presence to events greatly helped me. To be clear, I did live in a game dev hub. I was from Montreal. I now live in Quebec City, but they're both quite big game cities. So it is much easier in my situation to attend these events because it's very local. But if you do have those, I strongly recommend attending them. So to be clear also, that face-to-face interaction didn't directly lead me to a job, but people knowing that, hey, I do exist and there is this somebody somewhere has led to mutuals recommending me for a gig. Alongside that would be, it's a bit tiring, but constant online presence, especially now that it's COVID. I've gotten basically all of my gigs right now through Twitter. It's just people, especially in the game audio scene, Twitter's very, very active. So I would strongly recommend being present. It's a bit tiring as well because you end up doom scrolling and that's not what you want to do, but it did give me some pretty decent job opportunities. That and Slack too. In game audio, we have several different Slack channels for different people. So that's been huge.
That's great. And Alexi or Kitty, do you have anything to add?
I think for me, the biggest source of contract work is definitely being rehired by the same clients pretty consistently. And this mainly comes from building up a network of people that trust you to do a good job, or if there's like something up in the air, like a potential contract down the line, they'll like instantly think of you, the contractor, because you're good at like either creating estimates, and that kind of funnel into a potential you being chosen for a contract later down the line. So that's pretty much been my main source. And being mutually referred was my first into the contract work, similar to Neha.
Yeah, Neha and me are pretty much the same in that a lot of my work has come from Twitter and from Slack groups and what have you. I think I got lucky. I've been freelance my entire like working life, and that includes what I used to do before, which was a TV producer. Before I was a web developer, then a TV producer. But getting into games, my first contract was mostly luck. And then it was being the only producer in a tiny industry where there were no other producers. But in general, like even now, like I work with teams all over the world, and it is just partly having a constant presence, and constantly putting myself out there. And it's the same thing. Like if I meet somebody that I've ended up working with, I've usually met them like 2 years before, and then something has come up and they've thought, oh yeah, I remember Kitty does that, and then they've come and contacted me. So yeah, it's kind of about always it's the hustle, which is
The online
tiring.
hustle.
It is the hustle, and I'm at the point now that I don't feel like I need to hustle quite as much. The jobs are kind of coming to me. And I think I broke that threshold maybe about a year. So that was 5 years of solid hustle to get to that point.
And so when you say like hustle and having an online presence, what kind of things do you do? Like, do you share articles? Do you interact online with other people in your industry or in your field? Do you write posts or create new content? Like, what kind of things did you do to boost your online presence?
For me personally, it started off with just like being on Twitter and stuff and meeting people at networking events in general. I find that if I treated any of these spaces as cool places to meet other people that like the same things that I did, I find that everything just, I was more relaxed, things went better. As time went on, that evolved into sharing, you know, things or writing Twitter posts or whatever, but mainly it's just connecting with people. Like people don't like to be spoken to. People don't want, like, especially if you're networking and stuff, that like and even on Twitter, people remember the people that they actually interacted with and had a conversation or connected with. Perfect example is me and Neha have never met before, and yet I feel like we know each other very well because we met on Twitter a little while ago.
Okay, that's funny because I found Neha on Twitter just from like mutual people, and so yeah, and then I think Neha, you followed me and I followed you, and I was
Yeah.
like, why don't I invite Neha to this panel? 'Cause it seems like you do contract work.
Right?
Exactly.
And that's kind of just how it works. It's like the stuff that you do, you have it there and you have it present, but how I've ended up getting jobs is just by interacting and conversing with people. I find more on a human level works better than trying to necessarily sell yourself and be like, hey,
Mhm.
look at me, I'm this. Hey, look at this really sensible thing. People are like, okay, whatever. People are interested. If they're getting into a long-term contract or relationship with you, they're more likely, I think, to remember you because they're like, oh, that person was cool. And they do this thing. So
I totally agree with Kitty. Interacting with folks on Twitter has been huge for me, and there's a way of interacting that I think is very important, and I like to call this the hungry people versus genuine people, where it's like you're interacting just because you want to be noticed, just because you want that famous person or whatever it is to, you know, give you a gig, and it's kind of obvious to me. It's really hard to put it into words, but
it's the same as when you network in person, right?
yeah, you know what it means. Yeah, it's that
People can
feeling.
tell, yeah, people
Yeah,
can tell when you just want something from them and nothing else.
yeah.
It
And
just
that switches them off.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
it
totally.
just reminds me of like at GDC one year I went and it's like the speaker is speaking and then they come off the stage and it's just like a swarm of people and it's so overwhelming. It's like I actually have a question I want to ask, but like I don't want to like jump in and like be one of this giant
Yeah.
group of like
Yeah.
fan people following you around.
I actually
JD's,
had a
yeah.
I actually had a friend talk to me literally today about the fact that she got talking with the head of Oculus a little while ago, and she actually didn't realize who it was. She was just having a beer at an event, and like people would keep coming over and like lean over her to like try and sell or talk to this guy, and his eyes just glazed over every time. He was like, "I just want to have a beer, man."
Yeah, yeah, it is
And
so tiring.
it'll be the fun person that he was having a beer with that he'll probably remember than any person that hovered over his shoulder. So, yeah. I
Yeah.
think
So
one of the keys of that is sometimes don't not to not try, but just chill out, like relax a bit and just see what happens.
I think it's respect at the end of the day. I mean,
Mhm.
to engage with somebody because you want a gig, it's pretty shallow. So it turns me off. But yeah, interacting in a genuine way. For audio people, I do recommend sharing a bit of what you're doing because it's cool getting feedback here and there. Not from everyone. But yeah, if you're comfortable with and if your contract lets you, do share your work. And I joke around with my friends sometimes, but I say that, I learned more through Twitter in a year than my 3 years of bachelor's. Different fields though, classical piano, so like it's on the same thing. But at least for the technology courses, I've learned so much more from Twitter than a school setting. So it's very enriching in that sense too.
So when you do, make that connection, get that gig and get that job, what measures would you take to protect kind of yourself? And this is like making sure that you get paid. How do you handle working overtime or clients changing their mind a lot? And Alexi, if you could start with this.
Sure. So in my early contracting days, I was really bad at setting boundaries. If a client messaged me at 8 o'clock being like, we need renders tomorrow, it's like, all right, I'll get on it and I'll get it done. But you'll find you'll just be unhappy and it's not sustainable. So what I do now is at 5 p.m. sharp, I like leave my desk and I start cooking dinner or something. And then when I come back, I'm kind of reset and I'm ready to like enjoy my night. And I found that doing that over a long period of time has really helped me um, build both boundaries of my contracts, and also it lets other people on the projects know my boundaries. And so like clients have been so much better about me not necessarily responding right away. Like they know my time frame and my time zone, and um, maybe it's luck with clients. I'm sure there are some that would kind of breach those boundaries, but for me personally, um, being very clear about with the client about what I expect. That has helped a lot. In terms of like project scope, that's a little complicated for me because my contracts are usually very long. Like my current one is 3 years long, and it was only supposed to be 1 year long. Um, but because the client kept changing their minds, we just kept renegotiating the contract, which is really the best way um, you can avoid overworking yourself, is not being afraid to just change up the contract. Usually they'll be pretty understanding, even more so if they can afford it. And usually they can if they want the changes. So I think for me, I have a hard time saying no, but the biggest thing you can do is say no, because they'll kind of understand that you are at equal power. They need you as much as you need them in a lot of scenarios, especially if you've been on the contract for a while.
Um, I think for me, it's a mix of things. And again, it's different when it comes to web development versus being a producer. Because I am working with multiple clients in one day. So normally I'm working, it's 3 at this point. It was 5 at one point, which was very stressful. I just have to be very strict with my work hours. So each team that I work with know that I am available to that team between this hour and this hour. And outside of that, they can contact me, but I won't get back to them till the next day until I'm back in the office. Sometimes that can slip a bit, but I find that that is the best way to set expectations of when I'm going to be around. And it also means that somebody else has to be there if there are emergencies, and they can't necessarily rely on me for that. It's kind of a price of them not being able to afford a producer full time, and what I can reasonably do in the time that I have. When it comes to being a web developer, or doing anything for web, which I imagine to me is akin to either being a programmer or a designer, I have very strict contracts that I have developed over the years, that stipulate a certain amount of iterations. And if there's any more iterations more than that, contracts have to be readjusted. Again, they still know my working hours, and I usually stipulate clauses for if you want me to work more than that, it's you need to pay extra. I'm very strict about, like, I won't, you can message me, but it doesn't mean I'm going to respond within a certain time. And I also leave a certain amount of time for like QA and stuff at the end. That is a window basically, because I've had enough clients that have been submitted the work and then they don't QA it till like a month later, and then they come knocking on my door, and I've obviously already QA'd it, but they find other bugs, and I'm like, you have a 2-week window to QA it and give me feedback, in which I will make adjustments. After that, anything else outside that window is extra. But that's all come from like years of having not having it very clearly stated in the contract, and then maybe having to do extra stuff. So I basically put it all in writing so that I'm covered that way.
Sounds like learning a lot from mistakes and then making sure it never happens again.
Yes, it is.
Neha, did you want to add anything else?
Yes, I had something similar to Kitty where I do have like a max of 3 iterations or whatever many, and after that we have to rediscuss. I also kind of veto my clients more or less, where I really ask around a lot before I take up on a new contract. Usually I end up having some mutual, so I could get some feedback like, oh yeah, this person's cool, so I'll do it. And then for most of my contracts, I ask for money upfront. So it could be a third, it could be a half, but I absolutely want a transfer the first day I start working. And then we could give the second half or third along the way. But I usually don't work without that first, unless we're close mutuals. And in that sense, I've done work for a month or two without pay, and that was okay for me because they're trusted friends and we have strong bonds. And I knew that they were going through financial, not issues, but documentations and this and that, and they had their own stuff. But in general, for new clients, I absolutely ask for first payment on the day of.
I think that makes a lot of sense too. So that way people aren't just like, thanks for this work, bye.
And that's happened in audio a lot from like
God.
other horror stories, which is why I've learned that no, you shouldn't really ask for, and of course ask around, which is a bit annoying because if you don't have contacts and then there's no one to ask around. But once you start dabbling in the waters, I think it's important to just, even if you're not super friends with somebody, to maybe just poke them and ask, hey, do you know, this person and how are they? And then go on from there.
So we've got a few more questions in the Q&A from attendees. So going back to having a social presence, the question is, how can people who are socially awkward or just plain bad at quickly connecting with others, especially over social media and without a network, get into freelancing?
I don't know if I'm a good person to answer that because I've always been really good at
You're very
networking.
outgoing, Kitty.
It's just my personality.
Yeah.
I think one thing that I did when I was in my university course is that I had a friend who was like super skilled programmer. Like he was fantastic, but he wasn't great. His interpersonal skills weren't good, and he was very awkward talking to new people. And so we kind of struck a deal, him and I, where I would help him meet people and I would help get him introductions and help him network essentially. And he would help me with some of my programming things. So it was kind of like a thing where I helped him and he helped me. So you could always try something like that if you have a friend that's maybe naturally a bit more gregarious. I started going to the games industry gathering at the start of the pandemic. If anybody has heard of that, it can be the sort of thing that is quite daunting to do if you are somebody who's a bit socially awkward at the start. But I find that the kind of group of people that are there and the tone of the entire event, it's every Friday night basically. They stick you in a Zoom and then you get put into Zoom rooms every 20 minutes. But I find that the format of just talking to like 3 or 4 people and the type of people that seem to be attracted to it is just very cozy and comfortable, and people just having nice casual chats is also a really great way to meet people. I've met some fantastic people and also got some work from it too. So that might be a good place to start, because what people tend to do in that as well is at the moment people in is like, oh, what's everyone Twitter handle and then share Twitters. And I've probably grown my Twitter following quite a bit since I've started going, because I've just met so many people and we've shared, and that's just expanded all of our networks. So that's maybe my suggestion. I don't know how helpful that is. I'm sorry.
I'm the socially awkward person. Like when I was told to join Twitter, I just wanted to cry. I'm like, no, I can't. Like I could barely handle like my personal Facebook. I can't do this. So I actually started really long-time lurker is my go-to, where I'm there. I don't tweet. I don't do nothing. I'm just there. But even with just being there and just doom scrolling or scrolling, you kind of get used to it. It's hard at first, and for me, it was almost observing what do other people do, or how do I do this, because it's just not natural to me. I'm fine in a more in human interaction, and even there, like once I get in the mood, it's okay. But before that, I used to like in-person events, I would have issues where I just couldn't eat the day of. I would have a good cry, then go, and all sorts of things. But it's things that was at my lowest, but that you grow over time. So even if you are, super awkward and super not like an introvert, it is possible. You can do it. I think it just takes a bit more time, a bit more effort, and once you start getting a couple friends here and there, it's a lot easier. And I don't hate it as much.
Yeah, I'm also very introverted and have a difficult time in social situations, but I found that Kitty kind of made a good point that helping others is a great way of building a natural friendship, which could lead down the road to networking connections. And I think that's the best way is to build friendships. And that's the easiest way for me as a introverted person, because I can't network very well, but I can talk about like video games or hobbies very easily with people. So, and then we can talk about like art and stuff. So,
Also the loveliest way.
It's funny, Neha, that you mentioned about like before events, like you wouldn't be able to eat. That's me today at this event. I was like, okay, I like have no appetite. I'm like hands are sweaty, but at least I'm like behind a screen, you know, I'm a little safe back here. All right, so we have a bunch more questions. I like this one. Do you have any advice for raising your rates with already established clients?
That's a fun one.
That
I
one's
think
hard.
Yeah, I think I've only done it a couple of times because normally what happens with me is as a producer, I'll like help them with their project and then I'll move on. Um, my most recent example was we finished the game and now I'm back doing DLC, and in between that I've raised my rates. But I guess the main thing if you're trying to raise your rates with the client is give them as much heads up as possible. If they're a good client, they won't necessarily even question it. They'll just be like, all right, okay, cool, you're raising your rates. And just give them a warning. But yeah, I've never actually had to give explanations as to why. I've just been like, hey, just so you know, I'm raising my rates. And they're like, cool. So, not being difficult.
I think a good way of approaching the subject is, at least for us at Weathered Sweater, what happens a lot is a contract will have a timeline of like 1 year. And if a project has to get extended to like 2 years, that's when we'll be like, well, if we're going to spend 2 years on this, we'd like some more money for this work. That's usually how we approach that sort of conversation.
And Neha, did you want to add anything?
Personally, I started freelancing about a year and a half ago, so I haven't had to raise my rates as much. I do explain though if they're like, hey, it's under you're overquoting, like my rates are too high. I do make it it's really important for them to know that I am undercharging for you, but these are my usual rates, so that they know that realistically this is an audio budget, but I am, you know, I'm friends with you or we're buddies or whatever, so therefore, but it's still important for them to know.
Yeah, you put the discount in every invoice.
Yeah, so they know.
You have a discount, my friend.
I think this question is also important because I remember seeing a lot on Twitter about like women who freelance or do contract work. Their rates are about half of what men charge. So when when I see statistics like that, I'm like, whoa! Like for anyone in the audience that is like freelancing or contracting, I think it's always good to maybe review your rates with your peers and make sure, hey, am I charging a fair rate for my skills and my expertise?
I think that actually happened to me very like just last year because I was charging not a significant amount less, but I was charging a lot less, and I was thinking that I should up my rates. But I decided to drop one of my clients, and said client afterwards said, "Hey, you should really up your rate because the other people who are coming in to apply for the role you just had are quoting significantly more." And so I'd already been thinking about it, and I upped my rate anyway. But it was also very nice of them to inform me what people were quoting, which was what they did. And so it gave me a good gauge of where I should set myself. But if you can find out some way, definitely do that. I've seen people on like YouTube and stuff give big explanations of like trying to work it out based on your living and stuff like that, and your own expenses. I don't necessarily agree with that. I also believe that you should be paid based on your experience and your skills and how long you've been doing something, because that cumulative experience over time means that you're far more efficient. And so technically they're still paying you for the same amount of work. It's just you're getting it done a lot faster and more efficiently. you should charge more.
I've got another question for y'all. So what is your ideal client relationship like, especially in terms of safety and equitability? I hope I pronounced that right.
By equitability, do they mean like share options, or don't quite
We're gonna have
understand
to
what they mean
wait
by
for that answer.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, just like they said, just like fairness in general.
Oh, okay. Anybody want to go ahead?
I think, sorry, go ahead, Kitty.
No, go ahead.
I think it goes back to usually I ask around my mutuals, like, who is this person? And that just says a lot. So I know I'm with a safe person, which is why I ask around. My ideal client would also be someone who's obviously passionate about audio, or that really, it's a bit boring working with somebody who, oh, just give me the sounds and that's it. I really want to know the vision of your project. I want this to be, a fruit of our labors, but together. So that's been huge for me. And yeah, just checking their backgrounds and who they are before signing anything, before continuing discussions, has made me feel quite safe. And yeah, it's just making sure, asking around a lot has helped.
Yeah, I think I pretty much do the same thing. And that's one of the benefits of networking. You meet so many people that whenever a client does potentially come along, like you're able to just ask somebody because you probably met them or you know them in some way. I don't think I've been burned since the start of my career in games. I think the rest of it's been pretty. There is part of it I feel like I've gotten lucky, just landing contracts with great teams and great people. However, I feel like because of the way I've been burned in the past, um, I'm always watching out for red flags with people and certain things that they say and certain things that they do. And partly because one of the things that because I've been freelancing in total about 12 years, I always have at least 3 or 4 months like rent and living expenses saved away just in case something terrible happens, no matter what. So if somebody does come along who isn't a great client and is messing me around, I'll just drop them. I just like I feel like at least I'm at the point where it's not going to affect future opportunities if I let them go. And so my mental and physical health is more important, and I have that buffer for that reason, so that if I need to drop somebody. But it also does help having multiple clients at the same time, so that if something like that does happen, you can just drop somebody. But uh I'd say my ideal relationship is just making sure going in with an ironclad contract. Like I cannot praise contracts high enough. Just to make sure that you are covered and protected legally if anything does go a bit sideways. And in general with the contract with the client, it's all about your boundaries, realistic expectations, and making sure like the more honest a dialogue you can have with your client, the better. If you can't be honest about things, or you're worried about it, or they react quite emotionally or dramatically to things a lot, that's not a good relationship.
Alexi, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing about my ideal client is a client that can trust me and I can trust them. And having that sort of mutual trust allows both of us to grow. So, like on a games project, if the client trusts you, you might make decisions that they at first aren't sure about, but they end up loving it, and then you can bounce off each other, and bring the contract into a totally awesome new direction, which happens quite frequently. Um, I've had bad clients in the past, and that kind of trust doesn't exist. And what happens is it's just like every single topic is friction and just tiresome. And that's a lot more draining than when you trust each other that you'll each be fair to each other. So that's my ideal is far better uh, than the worst case scenario, obviously. But if the worst case scenario does happen where like you don't trust each other and it's just a contract for the sake of a contract, I think you just got to find the fun in it yourself and kind of grow on your own. so that you can find clients down the road who will trust you and be fair to you. Because at first you'll probably end up with the worst clients, and that's just part of the growing process, is learning from mistakes and who you think you can trust and don't end up trusting.
So-
Can I just add something? A
Yes.
trick that I find works quite well is asking a company or a client what their culture is, what their company culture is. And if they say they don't know or they don't have one, run away. It's not foolproof, but it definitely makes a big difference, because if they have a company culture that they're purposefully outlined and they're setting out for, it means they care about their people more than the average Joe, I guess. Doesn't make them perfect though, but still.
So in the case where you are in a bad client relationship, how do you fire them?
I haven't had to deal with that at all, honestly. So I usually, quit before I start.
The one that sticks out in my head was actually my very first job, where I think I wasn't actually freelance at that point. I was an employee, but I came back from a holiday and they were like, "We're not going to pay you." And I'm like, "Are you not now?" And they said, "Oh, well, the other option is you could work part-time. You could get paid part-time, and then find your wage in the budget." And I was like, "I'm also not going to do that." So that was just a case of, like, I'm not happy under these work conditions. This is not conducive to a healthy environment, and I'm gonna leave. With other clients, like recently, I did have to let a couple of clients go, and it wasn't because they were terrible clients. I just was overworked. It's not that dissimilar to quitting a job the way you normally would. It's literally just a case of letting them know, "Hi, I have to wrap up with this project in the next." I usually try and give a month's notice to give them plenty of time to find somebody else. And then it'll be a case of, right, okay, yeah, you need to find somebody else. I can help you as your producer. But I'll need to move on. That's it. It's not usually not a big drama. Usually.
All right, we have a ton of questions and I've been bouncing around. And we have maybe 6-7 minutes left. So let's pump these answers out. Okay, so once you set boundaries around work, what are some ways that you enforce those boundaries when a client asks too much?
I tell them no. I say no. Usually I can direct them to my calendar as well, you see, that has the slot. But if they're trying to ask too much, you just have to reiterate your boundaries and say it's either this or nothing, choose.
I tell them too that it's just so much more work, and I don't know if I could do it. Probably not. And yeah, maybe for another milestone.
Yeah, another milestone is pretty much hits it on the head. Like, if there's like a scope extension of some sort, I'll just present my timeline realistically, and it's like, do you see somewhere you could fit this? Because I don't. And then that's when we start renegotiating the contract.
That is very good.
Those aren't the words I use, to be clear, but it's the gist. It's pretty much how I approach it.
Okay.
You got to put out the sass and then bring it back.
Yeah, right. Smaller.
I do try to be very realistic about it in a very human way, or friendship way, constructive way. A lot of scope extensions come out of either need or excitement. So I don't shoot it down. I just try to see where we can work together to make it happen.
I think this is going to be our last question for today. I just want to say I'm sorry if I didn't get through everyone's questions, but all the panelists' Twitter handles are on the event site. So maybe you can DM them if that's cool. Thumbs up from everyone. Awesome. So our last question for today, how often do you have to turn down clients and what makes you refuse a gig?
Most often it's budget does not work. I also give this often to clients, and especially in the past, I would give them the option of, hey, what about a trade skill? Like if you're an artist, if you could do me a logo, if you could redesign, if you're a web designer, can we redesign my website? If you have coding skills, can you give me Unity lessons in exchange? I will lower my rate. So my first option is my regular rates. And then if I actually like the project, I'll be like, hey, even if you can't afford this, I'm willing to lower my rate if we could do a skill exchange. And if that's also a no, then at that point it's unfortunate, but I'd have to let go because obviously the scoping does not work for my needs.
For me, it's literally just been scheduling issues usually. I think I've already had to turn down 2 jobs. Well, I tried to turn down 2 jobs in January, and it was just because I physically don't have the time. And I think it's super important to know what your capacity is and how much you can actually do realistically for you, because trying to take on too much, which is, one of the problems with freelancing, you'll have dry periods. And so then whenever you have work, you might potentially take on too much because you're worried about the dry period again. You need to make sure that you don't go over that, because if you burn out, you screw yourself later on down the line.
Yeah, I for me, it's usually if it's work that's hard and I don't really want to do, like optimization is a very common one that we get. Um, and I propose a higher budget, or like our company proposes a higher budget for that work, and the client doesn't want to meet it, then we're not going to do it. So usually it's like you got to figure out like a scale of, for a gig, how much am I going to enjoy this work, and what's going to be the budget for me to like actually do this work and be somewhat happy. Like, can I charge more for this work that I don't enjoy? And if it doesn't work out, then that's when you turn down the gig.
Oh, you should definitely have a higher rate for like shit work and shit clients.
Yes, definitely.
Like, times a half or double the amount. Why not? You're gonna turn down the work otherwise, so.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like I feel like the biggest takeaway I had from this is that you definitely need a contract and that you're going to mess up a lot and maybe burn out a few times. But you're going to learn from your mistakes and have a super awesome contract.
I've burned out a few times, and I never want to go back there. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I've burnt out before, but it's like a truly humbling and growing experience where like you'll never want to experience that again, but it's a formative experience that I don't want to say is a must, because I hate crunch culture, I hate that sort of stuff, and I don't want it to be normal in the industry. Um, I don't even want to say, but it's like part of the experience, because it doesn't have to be, but it
it
might
teaches you.
happen.
It
And
teaches
if
you
you're
about yourself.
prepared, yeah, exactly. And if you're prepared for it, it won't be as bad as if you were potentially unprepared for it.
That's true. Yeah, knowing that, hey, burnout is a thing and that this might happen already gives you the tool set to prepare if anything.
It definitely gives you a healthier work-life balance, and
Yeah.
makes you realize just how important it is to have your downtime and have the things that you love outside of work and have the separation. Especially if you're working at home and you're working in an office all the time, or at a desk, you need to be able to step away from that. Otherwise, it may potentially take away your passion for the thing that you love.
That's awesome. I just want to say thank you to Alexi, Kitty, and Neha. This was super fun. I feel like I learned a lot, and I hope that everyone else here did too.